Picture yourself stepping back through 2,000 years into the heart of a bustling Roman city. The air is thick with the scent of incense and roasting meat, and the sound of laughter and music spills from a nearby villa. You are not just an observer today, you are an honored guest at a wedding. But this is no simple ceremony. This is a world of deep superstition, where every action, from the way the bride parts her hair to the very timing of the event, is scrutinized for divine favor or catastrophic omen. What you're about to witness is a complex social drama, a vital contract between families, and a vibrant celebration that holds the future of a new household in its balance. Forget the tidy images of togas and simple vows you might carry in your mind. The reality of a Roman wedding was a profound, sometimes bizarre, and utterly captivating ritual that wove together law, religion, and raw human emotion in a way that would feel both strangely familiar and completely alien to us today. This journey into the past is about to uncover the surprising truths of what Roman weddings were really like. We will pull back the curtain on a process that began not with romance, but with hard-nosed legal and financial negotiations between fathers, where a young woman's future was often sealed with a handshake and a detailed dowry agreement. The path to the altar was fraught with peril from the gods themselves, as families consulted priests and astrologers to choose the perfect, luck-filled day, desperately avoiding any hint of a bad omen that could curse the union before it even began. Every step was a performance steeped in symbolic meaning, a carefully choreographed dance designed to ensure prosperity, fertility, and the favor of the capricious deities who watched over Roman life. So prepare to walk alongside the nervous bride as she dons her flame-colored veil and carefully parts her hair with a speared tip, a chilling reminder of Rome's martial past. You'll join the raucous, torch-lit procession that snakes through the dark city streets, a public spectacle of joy and noise meant to scare away malevolent spirits. And finally, we will cross the threshold into the bridal chamber, where the rituals of consummation were not a private affair, but a deeply symbolic act witnessed, in a way, by the entire community. This is the untold story of Roman matrimony, a world where love was often a secondary concern to duty, where superstition ruled the day, and where a single wedding could solidify political alliances and shape the destiny of the republic itself. To truly grasp the significance of a Roman wedding, we must first set aside our modern notion of marriage as a partnership founded on love. For the Romans, the institution was called matrimonium, a word whose very root, mater or mother, reveals its core purpose. This was not primarily a romantic union between two individuals, but a foundational social and legal contract designed for one paramount goal: the production of legitimate Roman citizens. The entire structure of Roman society, from its smallest families to the vast machinery of the state, depended on this system. A successful matrimonium ensured the continuation of a family's name, its religious rights, and its property for future generations. It was about securing a lineage pure and simple. In a world without our concept of a nation-state, the family unit was the essential building block of civilization, and matrimonium was the tool that cemented its future. At the heart of this contract was a crucial legal transfer known as conventio in manum, the act of a woman passing from the authority, or potestas, of her father into the manus, or hand of her husband. This was a profound shift in legal identity. Before marriage, a Roman daughter was essentially an extension of her father's legal and economic power. After the ceremony and the proper rituals, she became part of her husband's family, subject to his legal control and sharing in his religious cult. Her old family ties were, in a legal sense, severed. This transfer wasn't just symbolic. It had concrete implications for everything from property rights to the legal standing of any children born from the union. Those children would be undisputed citizens of Rome and legitimate heirs to their father's estate, a status that was anything but guaranteed outside the bonds of matrimonium. Beyond the legal mechanics, this system served a powerful political function, especially among the elite. A wedding was rarely just a private celebration. It was a strategic alliance, a public declaration of friendship and mutual support between two powerful households. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a corporate merger, where the dowry was not just a payment but a capital investment, and the bride was a living symbol of the new partnership. These alliances could consolidate wealth, secure political favors, and end long-standing rivalries. For a rising senatorial family, marrying a daughter into an older, more established patrician clan could grant social prestige and political influence that might take generations to build otherwise. The personal feelings of the bride and groom were, in most cases, a secondary consideration to the immense social and economic benefits that the union promised for their respective families. This starkly practical foundation creates a fascinating tension when we compare it to our contemporary ideals. We enter marriage seeking a soulmate, a life partner chosen for love, mutual respect, and shared personal goals. The Romans sought a guarantor of their bloodline, a manager for their household, and a bond with a useful ally. Their focus was on duty, honor, and the stability of the state, not the emotional fulfillment of the couple. This fundamental difference in worldview is the key that unlocks the entire ritual. Every strange custom, from the harsh negotiation of the dowry to the specific words spoken during the ceremony, makes perfect sense when you understand that the ultimate goal was not a happy couple, but a strong, legitimate Roman family. The entire spectacle was a public performance of this vital social contract, a carefully orchestrated drama where the future of a lineage, and by extension, a piece of Rome itself, was at stake. With this understanding of marriage as a foundational social contract, it's natural to wonder who was actually allowed to participate in this vital institution. The Roman state didn't leave such matters to chance. The legal gates to matrimony were carefully guarded, defining who could build a legitimate family and who was forever shut out. At the most basic level, the participants needed to be Roman citizens, or in some specific cases, have a special grant of rights. But even among citizens, the path to the altar was narrow, dictated by age, legal status, and a concept so crucial it had its own name, connubium. This term, connubium, represents the legal capacity to form a Roman marriage. It's a deceptively simple idea with profound consequences. Without connubium, any union was legally void. The couple cohabitated, but their children would be considered illegitimate, unable to inherit property or claim citizenship rights from their father. This wasn't just a social stigma. It was a legal death sentence for a family line. Surprisingly, this right wasn't universal. For example, a Roman soldier on active duty was expressly forbidden from marrying until the reign of Emperor Septimius Severus in the late 2nd century. The state feared that family ties would distract a legionary from his absolute loyalty to his commander and his unit. Imagine the countless personal tragedies this single law created, with soldiers forming deep, lifelong bonds that the law refused to recognize, their children born into a legal limbo. Age was another critical factor, and here the Roman norms can feel shocking to a modern audience. The legal minimum was extraordinarily young by our standards. A girl could be married as soon as she was thought capable of bearing children, which was around the age of 12. For boys, the legal age was set at 14. This doesn't necessarily mean that 12-year-olds were routinely thrust into marital life, but the legal framework permitted it, especially among the aristocracy where political alliances couldn't wait for personal maturity. In practice, while elite girls often married in their early teens, men from similar backgrounds frequently delayed marriage until their late 20s. This gap wasn't about romance. It was about a man establishing his career in public life or the military before taking on the responsibility of a household. So, you would often have a teenage bride and a groom twice her age, a pairing that underscores the practical rather than emotional core of these arrangements. Class and social standing created the most rigid and fascinating restrictions. In the early days of the Republic, a stark legal barrier existed between the privileged patrician class and the common plebeians. They simply could not intermarry. This was a tool for the patricians to maintain their pure, elite bloodlines and consolidate power. However, this couldn't last forever. The plebeians agitated for change, and around 445 BC, the Canulean law finally broke down this wall, granting connubium between the orders. This was a social revolution, allowing for new alliances and the gradual blending of the old aristocracy with wealthy and powerful plebeian families. Yet, new class barriers soon arose to take its place. During the imperial period, a senator, a member of the highest social echelon, was strictly prohibited from marrying a freedperson, someone who had once been enslaved. The state viewed such a union as a stain on the dignity of the senatorial order, a clear sign that while the old bloodlines had opened, the obsession with social hierarchy remained as strong as ever. These intricate rules reveal a society meticulously engineering its population through marriage law. It was a system designed to control property, maintain social hierarchies, and ensure a steady supply of legitimate citizens for the army and the state. Every restriction, from the soldier denied a family to the senator forbidden from marrying the person he might love, served the cold, calculating logic of Roman power. This legal scaffolding made the wedding itself possible, but it was only the beginning. Once a couple cleared these formidable legal hurdles, the real ritual could begin, a multi-day process steeped in symbolism and superstition, where every gesture held a meaning deeper than we can easily comprehend today. Imagine the search for a bride not as a quest for love, but as a high-stakes political campaign orchestrated from within the family home. At the center of this intricate social game stood the most powerful figure in a Roman household, the paterfamilias. This term means father of the family, but his authority, known as patria potestas, was absolute. He held the legal power of life and death over his children, and it was his solemn duty to arrange their marriages for the maximum benefit of the family line. The romantic desires of a young man or woman were not just irrelevant. They were potentially disruptive to a carefully laid plan that could span generations. The paterfamilias was the chief executive officer of the family corporation, and a marriage was his most powerful tool for mergers and acquisitions. The motivations driving these negotiations were ruthlessly pragmatic. For elite families, the primary goal was often political alliance. Marrying a daughter into the family of a powerful senator could secure votes, influence legislation, or provide protection from rivals. It was a way to weave your family's thread directly into the fabric of Roman power. For those newly wealthy from trade or military conquest, a marriage into an older, respected but perhaps financially struggling aristocratic family, was a classic path to social legitimacy. The old family gained a desperately needed infusion of cash, while the new family acquired the prestige of a venerable name, scrubbing away the stain of being considered upstarts. In more direct transactions, a marriage could even settle a crippling debt, with a daughter effectively becoming a form of human collateral to balance the ledgers between two households. The dowry, or das, was the financial engine of this entire arrangement. It was not a simple gift. It was a critical part of the contract, negotiated with the intensity of a modern business deal. The size and composition of the dowry reflected the bride's family's wealth and social standing, and served as their daughter's share of the inheritance, paid upfront. It could include vast tracts of land, valuable city properties, significant sums of coin, and even enslaved people. For the groom's family, accepting a large dowry was a public declaration of their own status and a vital infusion of capital. However, this money was not a free gift. The dowry was expected to be managed by the husband, but the capital typically remained the property of the wife's family. If the marriage ended through divorce or the wife's death, the dowry was legally supposed to be returned, a provision that gave the bride's family some leverage and ensured their investment was protected. Within this cold calculus of power and money, the young people at the heart of the arrangement were often little more than pawns. A daughter's life course could be decided for her when she was still a child, promised to a man she had never met, all to secure a business partnership for her father. While there are scattered accounts in letters and poems of parents who considered their children's feelings, this was the exception, not the rule. The primary question was not, are they compatible? But what does this union do for our family's future? The concept of personal happiness was subordinate to the ancient Roman ideals of pietas duty to family, gods, and state. A good son or daughter showed their virtue not by following their heart, but by accepting the partner chosen for them, thereby fulfilling their obligation to continue the family name and rights. This system, however, was not entirely monolithic or without its nuances. As Rome evolved from a small republic into a vast empire, a small degree of personal choice sometimes began to creep in, particularly among the non-elite. Among the bustling merchant classes or ordinary citizens, where vast political fortunes weren't at stake, families might allow a son to express a preference or even initiate a courtship, provided the match was still deemed socially and financially suitable. Yet even here, the final approval always rested with the paterfamilias. His signature on the marriage contract was what gave the union its legal force. So, while the process could occasionally involve a sliver of mutual affection, it remained at its core a transaction. The journey to the wedding day began not with a proposal of love, but with a strategic handshake between two fathers, a deal that set the stage for one of the most symbolically charged and superstitious days in a Roman citizen's life. Once the families had agreed on the union through intense negotiation, the first formal, public step was the sponsalia, the betrothal ceremony. This was far more than a casual promise or a simple engagement party as we might think of it today. It was a legally significant event that created a binding contract between the two households. The entire affair was conducted with solemnity and witnessed by relatives and friends, whose presence added social weight to the agreement. The heart of the ceremony was an explicit question and answer ritual. The groom's father or representative would formally ask the bride's father, "Do you promise to give your daughter to my son for the purpose of creating a legal marriage?" The response, "I do promise," was not just words of consent. In the Roman legal mind, these spoken vows created a powerful obligation, a sponsio, that bound both parties to proceed to the full marriage. A powerful symbol of this new bond was the exchange of pledges, and here we see the fascinating early roots of the wedding ring tradition. The groom would present his intended bride with a ring, but its meaning and material were deeply symbolic. While wealthy families might use gold, a more common and telling practice was to give a ring made of iron. This wasn't a sign of poverty. The iron ring, strong and durable, was a tangible promise of the groom's enduring strength and his commitment to a lasting union. The bride would wear this ring on the third finger of her left hand, based on the popular Roman belief that a delicate nerve, the vena amoris or vein of love, ran directly from that finger to the heart. This small, personal ritual, set against the backdrop of a serious legal negotiation, shows the Romans blending cold practicality with a nascent sense of romantic symbolism. At the same sponsalia, the financial heart of the marriage contract was formally sealed with the detailed announcement of the dowry, the das. While the broad terms had been hammered out in private, the betrothal was the moment these arrangements were declared before witnesses, making them a matter of public record and social expectation. A scribe might even be present to record the specifics. So many thousands of sesterces, a parcel of farmland, a city apartment block, and a number of enslaved attendants. This public declaration was crucial. It protected the bride's family's investment by ensuring everyone knew the exact value being transferred, and it bolstered the groom's family's prestige, showcasing the valuable alliance they were forming. The dowry was the bride's safety net and her contribution to the new household's economy, and its formalization at the sponsalia underscored that this was, in every sense, a business partnership. Given its legal gravity, breaking a betrothal was a serious matter with significant consequences, not just a simple change of heart. If the bride's family called off the engagement without a very compelling reason, such as discovering a profound moral flaw in the groom, they could forfeit the entire dowry that had already been pledged. This was a massive financial penalty designed to prevent families from backing out of deals for frivolous reasons, or to accept a better offer from a rival family. Conversely, if the groom was the one to break the contract, the bride's family could sue him for damages, claiming he had harmed her reputation and diminished her prospects for a future marriage. The legal system treated a broken betrothal as a breach of contract, not a romantic disappointment. This framework reveals a society that prioritized the stability of social agreements above the unpredictable whims of individual desire, ensuring that the carefully laid plans of the paterfamilias were not easily undone. With the legal and financial agreements firmly in place, the families now turned their attention to a matter they considered just as critical: selecting the perfect wedding day. This was not a simple matter of checking a calendar for an open date. For the Romans, the entire year was a tapestry woven with threads of divine favor and supernatural danger, and choosing the wrong day to marry was an invitation for disaster, potentially dooming the union to poverty, infertility, or an early death. They lived in a world where the gods and spirits were intimately involved in human affairs, and securing their blessing for such a foundational event was absolutely paramount. The entire process was governed by a complex set of religious rules and ancient superstitions designed to navigate this invisible landscape of luck. Certain periods of the year were strictly off-limits, deemed so unlucky that no sane family would risk hosting a wedding then. The entire month of May, for instance, was considered deeply inauspicious. This belief stemmed from the fact that the Lemuria, a festival dedicated to appeasing restless and potentially malevolent ghosts of the dead, fell in this month. The idea of beginning a new life and a new family during a time when the veil between the living and the dead was thought to be thin was utterly unthinkable. It was a direct contradiction as celebration of future generations held amidst rituals for the departed. Similarly, the first half of June was also avoided, but for a very different and surprisingly practical reason. Early June was the time of the Vestalia, a sacred festival honoring Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. During this period, the powerful Vestal virgins, Rome's most respected priestesses, would be engaged in solemn, secret rites that made the city's religious atmosphere feel unsuitable for the public joy and feasting of a wedding. The calendar was also dotted with specific days haunted by the memory of past tragedies. The most stark examples were the dies religiosi, days marked by historic military defeats or public calamities. Getting married on such a day was seen as aligning your new family with failure and mourning from the very start. Even more personal were the days of the parentalia, a multi-day festival in February when families honored their own ancestors. While this was a time of pious remembrance, it was also a period dominated by thoughts of the dead, making it another deeply unsuitable backdrop for a wedding, which was fundamentally about the creation of new life and a new lineage. The fear was that the spirits of the ancestors, however beloved, might somehow overshadow or even envy the vitality of the new couple. So, when was the ideal time to marry? Late June emerged as the most popular and auspicious period. Once the Vestalia concluded around the 9th of June, the religious restrictions lifted, and the rest of the month was bathed in a favorable light. The timing was perfect from an agricultural perspective as well. The early summer harvest was often complete, meaning families had more food and disposable wealth to fund the lavish celebrations. But the preference went even deeper. The latter half of June was sacred to Juno, the queen of the gods, and the divine protector of women, marriage, and childbirth. To be married under the watchful, benevolent eye of Juno was to secure the highest possible divine endorsement for a woman's future as a wife and mother. Aligning the wedding with her sacred time was the ultimate act of pious preparation. To navigate this complex calendar of omens, families would rarely rely on their own judgment alone. They would frequently consult professional interpreters of the divine will, augurs and astrologers. An augur would look for signs from the gods in the world around them, a practice known as taking the auspices. This could involve studying the flight patterns of birds, whether they flew in favorable groups or from an auspicious direction, or examining the eating habits of sacred chickens. Any unusual behavior in the natural world could be read as a divine message. An astrologer, on the other hand, would cast a detailed horoscope for both the bride and groom, searching their natal charts for compatibility and identifying a day when the planetary alignments promised prosperity, fertility, and long life. A negative reading from either expert was enough to postpone the entire wedding, no matter how much money had been spent or how many guests had been invited. The potential cost of divine displeasure was simply too high to ignore. This meticulous, almost obsessive attention to timing reveals a profound Roman truth. A successful marriage was believed to depend as much on the capricious will of the gods as it did on the careful calculations of men. The eve of the wedding was far from a quiet night of reflection. It was a time of intense, deeply symbolic rituals that transformed the bride spiritually and publicly, severing her old identity and preparing her for the new. One of the most poignant ceremonies involved the young woman saying a formal goodbye to her childhood. In a solemn moment within her father's home, she would gather her childhood toys and her bulla, the protective amulet she had worn since infancy, and dedicate them to the household gods, the Lairs. This act was profoundly significant. By offering these cherished objects to the gods who had protected her youth, she was publicly renouncing that part of her life. She was no longer a Pula, a girl under her father's guardianship. She was becoming a matrona, a married woman with her own duties and a new set of gods to worship in her husband's home. It was a ritual of closure, an emotional and religious pivot point that marked the definitive end of one chapter. Following this farewell, another powerful ritual physically marked her transition. The bride would make an offering of a lock of her hair to the gods. While some accounts suggest this was done at a temple, the most evocative tradition places this act in the family home, perhaps at the same small shrine to the Lairs. The cutting of hair was a potent symbol in Roman culture, often associated with loss, sacrifice, and a change in status. For a young man entering puberty, offering his first beard to the gods was a rite of passage. For the bride, this lock of hair was a sacrifice, a part of her own physical being given to the divine in exchange for their blessing on her new life. It also served as a public declaration. Her distinctive hairstyle on the wedding day would soon announce her new status to the world, and this initial offering was the first, sacred step in that physical transformation, a tangible surrender of her childhood self. Now began the meticulous preparation of her wedding attire, a process steeped in ancient symbolism where every item was chosen not for fashion, but for its ritual meaning. The foundation of her entire ensemble was a simple yet profoundly important garment, the tunica recta, or upright tunic. This was no luxurious gown. It was a straightforward white tunic woven on an old-fashioned, upright wooden loom. The very method of its creation was a throwback to an idealized, simpler Roman past, a time of supposed virtue and domestic purity. Wearing this tunic connected the bride to the legendary mothers of Rome's heroic age, women who were celebrated for their modesty, industry, and loyalty to the home. By donning this specific garment, she was not just dressing for a party. She was embodying the ancient Roman ideal of womanhood, signaling her readiness to take on the domestic duties of spinning and weaving that were the hallmark of her respectable matrona. The significance of this attire is deepened when we consider what came next. Over this simple tunic, the bride would be cinched with a special belt, tied in a complex knot known as the nodus herculeus, or the knot of Hercules. This was no ordinary bow. Hercules was revered as the guardian of hearth and home, and this intricate knot was believed to be incredibly powerful, a magical lock that only the groom would be allowed to untie later that night, symbolizing the consummation of the marriage. The entire ritual of dressing was thus a layered performance. The simple tunic spoke to her virtue and connection to tradition, while the powerful knot hinted at the sexual and procreative duties that lay ahead. Every element, from the dedicated toys to the woven tunic and the knotted belt, worked in concert to dismantle the girl's old identity and carefully construct the new woman, ready to cross the threshold and be led to her new home and a completely different life. Centered around the simple tunica recta, the bride's final and most dramatic adornments were all about transformation, creating an iconic image that was immediately recognizable to every Roman. The most breathtaking component was undoubtedly the flammeum, a large, translucent veil of a vibrant saffron yellow hue that was draped to completely cover her head and face. The name itself provides the key to its meaning, derived from flamma, the Latin word for flame. This fiery color was not chosen for simple aesthetic appeal. It was a powerful public prayer for fertility and a blessed union. Just as a flame is vivid, alive, and impossible to ignore, the bride's veil announced her new vital role as a life-giver. The color yellow, and specifically saffron, was also deeply associated with several goddesses central to a woman's life, including Juno, the protector of marriage, and Ceres, the goddess of the harvest and growth. By enveloping herself in this luminous, golden shroud, the bride was spiritually placing herself under their divine protection, transforming her into a walking symbol of auspiciousness and future abundance for all to see. Beneath this glowing veil, her hair was arranged in one of the most ancient and ritually significant styles known to the Roman world, the sine crines. This translates to 6 braids, and its construction was a meticulous, almost archaic process. The bride's hair was meticulously parted into 6 separate locks, each one then carefully braided and wound around her head in a complex, crown-like formation. The sheer number of braids was itself symbolic. The number 6 was considered a perfect number in Roman numerology, representing harmony and balance, a hopeful omen for the balanced partnership of the new household. But the most startling part of the ritual was the tool used to create the part. Her hair was not separated with a simple comb, but with the haster recurva, the ritual tip of a bent spear. This was a chillingly potent symbol, directly connecting the intimate, domestic act of a wedding to the violent, public world of Roman warfare and conquest. The use of a spearhead speaks volumes about the Roman conception of marriage. It was a reminder that the bride, in a symbolic sense, was a prize captured in a peaceful negotiation, much like spoils taken in battle. It also invoked the protection of Mars, the god of war, but not for conflict. Here, Mars was being asked to guard the peace and fertility of the new home, his martial energy channeled into the defense of the family line. Some historians also suggest this practice harkened back to the legendary Sabine women, whose abduction by the first Romans was a foundational myth. In that story, violence was the precursor to the creation of Roman families, and the spear's touch on the wedding day was a faint, ritualized echo of that primal origin story, binding the bride to the very deepest layers of Roman identity and its complicated history. Further linking her to the sacred sphere, the sine crines hairstyle was uniquely shared by one other group in Roman society, the Vestal Virgins. These 6 priestesses, who tended the sacred flame of Vesta, were the only other women who wore their hair in this distinctive style. This parallel was deliberate and deeply meaningful. The Vestals were embodiments of pietas, sacred purity, and absolute devotion to the Roman state. By mirroring their hairstyle, the bride was aligning herself with these ultimate ideals of Roman womanhood. It was a public declaration that she, too, would uphold the sacred rights of her new household and maintain its moral and religious integrity. She was transitioning from a private girl into a public matrona, a woman whose virtue was as crucial to the health of the Republic as that of the Vestals themselves. To complete this sacred ensemble, the bride carried or wore a delicate wreath made from freshly gathered flowers and sacred herbs. This was not her random bouquet of pretty blossoms. Every plant was selected for its specific magical and symbolic properties. She would have gathered the flowers herself, a task that had to be done according to strict ritual guidelines to ensure their potency. Common choices included marjoram for happiness and love, verbena for protection and enchantment, and rosemary for fidelity and remembrance. The wreath itself, a circle with no beginning and no end, was a universal symbol of eternity, reflecting the hope that the marriage would be unbroken and everlasting. Together, these fragrant, living elements created a protective, auspicious aura around her, a final layer of natural magic to ward off any lingering malevolent spirits that might be drawn to such a momentous and vulnerable transition, ensuring she proceeded to the ceremony as a perfectly prepared symbol of ritual purity, divine favor, and future fertility. While the bride underwent her intricate, hours-long transformation into a living symbol of fertility and tradition, the groom's preparation was strikingly simple and swift in comparison. His focus was not on elaborate ritual dress, but on fulfilling his civic and religious duty. He would don his finest clothing, which for a formal occasion like his wedding meant his best toga. If he came from a prestigious family and had not yet reached the age of full citizenship, he would wear the toga praetexta, the formal white toga distinguished by its broad purple border. This garment was a public badge of honor, typically worn by freeborn boys and by magistrates while in office. Its presence at a wedding signaled the groom's high social standing and his connection to the political life of Rome. For a man who had already come of age, the pure white toga virilis of the adult citizen was the appropriate choice. In either case, his attire was about projecting his established identity as a Roman citizen, not about creating a new one for the day. This fundamental difference is telling. She was being ritually remade, while he was simply presenting the best version of his existing public self. The groom's most significant personal ritual before the ceremony was not a change of clothes, but a sacred act of piety. He would lead his family in offering a sacrifice to the gods, seeking their divine favor for the union he was about to enter. This typically involved the sacrifice of a small animal, such as a lamb or a pig. The ritual followed a strict formula. The animal would be examined for perfect, unblemished health, then led to an altar where prayers were recited. The vital organs were carefully examined by a priest or augur after the sacrifice. A healthy liver or a flawless heart was seen as a powerful affirmative sign from the gods, a green light for the marriage to proceed. This act placed the groom in the traditional Roman role of the paterfamilias in waiting, the head of household who was responsible for mediating between his family and the divine. His primary job was to secure the blessings of Jupiter, Juno, and the other gods for the practical success of the household, its protection, prosperity, and the birth of healthy heirs. This stark contrast in preparation highlights the deeply gendered symbolism woven into the fabric of the Roman wedding. The bride was the undisputed center of the visual and ritual spectacle. Her flame-colored veil, her 6 braids, and her spear-parted hair made her a mesmerizing, almost otherworldly figure, an icon of transition whose every detail was packed with meaning for the community to witness and interpret. The groom, by comparison, was a supporting actor in this particular drama. His role was to be the stable, unmoving point to which she would be transferred. He was the representative of the receiving household, the anchor of the new family unit. His simplicity underscored a key Roman ideal. While the woman's life was defined by a fundamental change in status and identity, the man's life was one of continuity. He was adding a wife to his existing household, not being reborn into a new one. This isn't to say his role was unimportant. It was simply different. The entire legal and financial architecture of the marriage had revolved around him and his father. The negotiations, the dowry, the transfer of manus, all of these were fundamentally about his lineage and his property. The wedding day itself, however, was the moment when the bride's journey took center stage. The rituals were designed to manage the profound social and spiritual vulnerability of a young woman leaving the protection of her father's gods for those of her husband. The groom's understated presence provided a pillar of stability amid this turbulence. He did not need to be transformed because, in the eyes of Roman society, he was already complete. His value was inherent in his citizenship, his family name, and his legal standing, all of which remained constant. Her value, on the other hand, was in her potential as a wife, a mother, and a link between two families, and the wedding rituals were a public performance of that potential being activated and transferred. Contrary to what you might picture, there was no procession to a grand temple, no robed priest presiding over an altar. The true heart of a Roman wedding ceremony was a surprisingly intimate and legalistic gathering that took place within the familiar walls of the bride's own family home. This was a deeply personal, domestic affair, centered not around a religious figure, but around the families and community members who would bear witness to the new alliance. The entire event was designed to be a public declaration of a private contract, and its power came from the collective presence of Roman citizens, not from the blessing of a clergy. The absence of an official state or religious officer is one of the most striking differences between Roman matrimony and many modern traditions, highlighting that its foundation was social and legal above all else. The focal point of this gathering was a beautifully simple yet profoundly symbolic act, the dextrum iunctio, the joining of the right hands. The bride and groom would stand facing each other, often in the home's atrium, the central and most public space of the house. Before their families and invited guests, they would clasp their right hands together. This was far more than a romantic gesture. In the Roman world, the right hand, the dextra, was the hand of trust, of oath-making, and of legal agreement. A handshake could seal a business deal or a political treaty, and here, in the marital context, it physically represented the binding legal contract that was being forged between the two individuals and their families. The clasped hands became a living symbol of the concord and partnership that was the ideal for a Roman marriage, a silent but powerful visual promise of the union being created. With their hands joined, the couple, or sometimes a designated speaker on their behalf, would recite the ceremonial vows of consent. These were not lengthy, personalized pledges of love and devotion, but rather concise, formulaic phrases that carried the full weight of legal commitment. The most traditional vow was a simple question and answer. The woman was asked, "You by tu Gaius ego Gaia," which translates to, "Where you are Gaius, I am Gaia." While this used common Roman names as placeholders, its meaning was profound. It was a declaration of the wife's intention to join her husband's family and community completely, to become a part of his world in every sense. The groom's corresponding pledge was an equally direct promise of acceptance and fidelity. The spoken word held immense power in Roman law and religion, and the clear, unambiguous recitation of these vows before witnesses was the verbal engine that activated the marriage contract. This leads to the most crucial element of the entire ceremony, the component that granted it legal force, the witnesses. For the marriage to be legally valid, the presence of at least 10 adult Roman citizens was required. These 10 men were not merely guests. They were the living, breathing legal system. Their role was to see and hear the vows, to witness the joining of hands, and to thereby attest, if ever called upon in a court of law, that the marriage had been properly conducted according to Roman custom. They were the guarantors of the contract's authenticity. This requirement underscores a fundamental Roman legal principle that the truest authority often resided in the community itself. The state did not need to send an official because the collective testimony of 10 respectable citizens was considered just as valid, if not more so. Their presence transformed a private family agreement into a publicly recognized and legally binding institution. This entire structure reveals a society that placed enormous trust in the social fabric and the integrity of its citizen body. The wedding ceremony was a perfect microcosm of the Roman worldview, practical, legalistic, and deeply embedded in the community. There was no need for divine intervention from a priest because the gods were already thought to be present in the household's own sacred spaces, in the lairs and penates that watched over the family hearth. The real magic, the real power that made a marriage, came from the will of the people involved and the community that sanctioned it. The clasped hands, the spoken vows, and the watchful eyes of 10 citizens, these were the essential ingredients that wove two separate lives into a single, legally recognized Roman family, setting the stage for the vibrant and chaotic public celebration that was about to erupt on the city streets. With the solemn words spoken and the hands firmly clasped, the atmosphere inside the house would instantly transform from one of ritual gravity to one of unrestrained festivity. The ceremony was the legal heart of the matter, but the cena nuptialis, the wedding feast, was its joyous, boisterous soul. This was no modest family meal. It was a lavish, often extravagant banquet funded by the groom's family, designed to showcase their wealth and hospitality while publicly celebrating the successful new alliance. Guests would spill from the atrium into the dining rooms, or triclinia, where the air would quickly grow thick with the aromas of roasting meats, spiced wine, and expensive perfumes. The feast served a crucial social function. It was a grand, celebratory ratification of the contract everyone had just witnessed, turning the private legal act into a shared communal experience of goodwill and abundance. The menu for such an occasion was a deliberate display of prosperity, especially among the elite. While a poorer family might serve a simple stew and coarse bread, a wealthy household would pull out all the stops to impress their new relatives and important guests. Imagine tables laden with delicacies, plump olives steeped in herbs, oysters harvested from the Lucrine Lake, and dishes of lupines and beans. The main courses could feature a whole roasted suckling pig, its skin glazed with honey and pepper, or a tender haunch of venison. Dormice, fattened in special clay pots and rolled in honey and poppy seeds, were a notorious Roman delicacy that would almost certainly make an appearance. This parade of food was more than mere sustenance. Every exotic dish and expensive spice was a statement, a tangible proof of the family's resources and their commitment to honoring their new in-laws with the very best they could offer. As the feast progressed, the wine would flow freely from large mixing bowls, water added to the strong vintage in carefully calibrated ratios. The drinking was a key part of the celebration's spirit, lowering inhibitions and fostering a sense of convivial unity among the two formerly separate family groups. Entertainment would have been essential for such a lengthy event. Musicians playing the double-piped tibia, a reed instrument similar to an aulos, would provide a lively soundtrack, their melodies cutting through the din of conversation and laughter. Professional dancers or acrobats might perform, their athletic movements captivating the guests, while hired singers might offer songs with bawdy, humorous lyrics, a traditional form of wedding entertainment called fessinina iacatio. These ribald verses were not just for fun. They were believed to ward off evil spirits with their loud, joyful noise, and to bless the couple with fertility through their suggestive content. The most symbolically powerful element of the entire feast, however, was not the food or the music, but the seating arrangement. For the first time, the bride and groom would recline together on a special couch known as the lectus genialis. In a standard Roman dining room, Guests would recline on 3 couches arranged around a central table, but the wedding couple occupied a place of unique honor. The lectus genialis was more than just a piece of furniture. Its name points to its profound purpose, as genialis relates to the genius, the household's guardian spirit. This divine force, which embodied the procreative and generative power of the paterfamilias, was thought to reside in the marriage bed. By reclining together on this sacred couch during the feast, the couple was physically placing themselves at the spiritual center of their new home, publicly establishing the very spot from which the genius would watch over their future life. This act of reclining side by side was itself a powerful visual declaration. In everyday Roman life, respectable women often sat upright during meals while men reclined. For the bride to recline next to her husband was a public affirmation of her new status as his partner, a matrona who now shared his social and domestic world in a way she never could have as a daughter in her father's house. They would eat from the same plate and drink from the same cup, further symbolizing their new shared life and the merging of their destinies. All eyes in the room would be drawn to them, seated there on the couch of the genius, a living portrait of the union that had just been forged. The feast, in all its noisy, flavorful, and vibrant glory, was thus the first act of their married life, a celebration held under the benevolent and watchful eye of the very spirit that would now define their household for years to come. As the last cups of wine were drained and the final songs of the feast faded, the energy of the wedding day pivoted dramatically from the contained revelry indoors to the wild, public spectacle of the deductio. This was the ceremonial procession, the moment the bride was formally escorted from her father's house to her new husband's home, and it was designed to be as loud, bright, and public as possible. The transition from one life to another was not a quiet, private affair. It was a boisterous, almost aggressive assertion of the new union, a performance for the entire neighborhood and the city itself. The gathering night was no barrier. In fact, it was essential, as the procession became a river of torchlight and sound flowing through the dark, narrow streets of Rome, a deliberate show of strength and joy meant to be seen and heard by all. Leading this vibrant, chaotic parade was the torchbearer, carrying a flaming torch of white thorn wood, specifically chosen for its supposed magical purity and its bright, clear flame. This was not just a practical light source. It was a powerful symbol of the bride herself, a living flame being carried from one hearth to another. The entire procession would follow this beacon, its light pushing back the shadows and symbolically carving a path of safety and auspiciousness through the potentially dangerous and spirit-filled darkness. The noise level was deliberately deafening. Guests and hired musicians would shout, sing, and play their flutes and pipes at a tremendous volume, creating a wall of sound. This cacophony had a vital, superstitious purpose: to frighten away any malevolent spirits or envious forces, known as the invidiosa, that might be drawn to the bride at her most vulnerable moment, in transit between two households, and thus under the full protection of neither. The soundtrack to this riotous parade was provided by the traditional Fessinina Iacatio, the Fescennine verses. These were not polite, romantic ballads. They were improvised, rhythmic chants filled with crude sexual innuendo, bawdy jokes, and good-natured ridicule aimed at both the bride and groom. The crowd would shout these verses back and forth, their risque content serving a dual, deeply rooted purpose. On one level, the explicit references to sexuality were a blunt, communal prayer for the couple's fertility, a public blessing for the conception of strong, healthy children. On another level, The humor and mockery were believed to be a powerful form of apotropaic magic, the idea that by openly mocking and drawing attention to the couple's imminent sexual union, you could disarm any evil that might try to spoil it. It was a classic case of using laughter and noise as a shield against misfortune. Amid this joyful chaos, another shower of symbolism rained down upon the cobblestones, the throwing of nuts. The groom or his young attendants would scatter walnuts or other nuts in the crowd, where scrambling children would eagerly gather them up. This seemingly simple act was packed with meaning. Nuts were a classic symbol of childhood, and by casting them away, the groom was publicly signifying that he was leaving his boyhood behind to take on the serious responsibilities of a married man and future paterfamilias. For the children who caught them, the nuts were more than just a treat. They were tangible tokens of good luck, a share in the wedding's auspicious energy. The sound of the nuts clattering on the stone streets added yet another layer to the protective noise, creating a percussive rhythm that further helped to drive away any lingering ill will. Guiding the bride through this sensory overload was a crucial figure, the pronuba. This was not a maid of honor in the modern sense, but a woman of immense social and ritual importance. She had to be a univera, a woman who had been married only once, and her marriage had to be considered happy and successful. She embodied the ideal that the bride was now stepping into. The pronuba's role was one of physical and symbolic support. She walked beside the nervous bride, perhaps holding her arm, offering quiet reassurance and practical guidance. Most importantly, she was the living proof that the transition from maiden to matron was not only possible, but could lead to a respected and honorable position in society. Her presence was a bridge between the bride's past and her future, a personal escort from one state of being to another. The bride herself was the mesmerizing, almost hypnotic center of this entire moving tableau. She was led along, seemingly passive, but every part of her appearance was an active participant in the ritual. She did not walk under her own power. Instead, two young boys, each holding one of her hands, gently pulled her forward. This detail is profoundly symbolic. It represents that she was not going to her new home entirely of her own volition, but was being led by the forces of tradition and duty, a physical manifestation of the transfer of authority from one family to another. Her famous flame-colored veil, the flammeum, would have glowed spectacularly in the torchlight, making her a radiant, unmissable icon moving through the darkness. Completing this sacred escort were three boys, each with a meticulously defined role that layered even more protection onto the procession. The two who held her hands have already been mentioned, but walking directly ahead of them was a third boy, carrying the special wedding torch. This trio was carefully selected. All three had to be freeborn citizens with both parents still living, a status considered highly auspicious and untainted by the bad luck of orphanhood or servitude. Their presence was a walking prayer for the couple's future, a hope that they, too, would have freeborn children and a long life together. As the procession finally neared its destination, this very torch would be used in one of the ceremony's most dramatic moments. It would be tossed into the waiting crowd of well-wishers, who would scramble for its remains. To catch a piece of the wedding torch was believed to bring the luck of the marriage into your own life, a final, shared blessing from the couple to their community, solidifying the public nature of the entire event, and ensuring the bride's journey ended not in solitude, but in a final, collective act of hope and celebration. The culmination of the noisy, torch-lit procession was not a warm welcome at the front door, but rather a series of deliberate, symbolic barriers the bride had to overcome before she could even set foot inside. The threshold of her new home was not a simple line to cross. It was a powerful spiritual boundary, guarded by ancient superstitions and demanding specific rituals of appeasement and acceptance. As the crowd's joyful shouts echoed in the street, all attention would focus on the bride standing before the entrance, a figure of immense vulnerability straddling two worlds. Her first actions here were a public performance of her future duties and a careful navigation of the invisible dangers that Romans believed lurked at such liminal spaces. Her very first task was one of dedication and promise. Before stepping inside, she would adorn the doorposts of her new home. She might wrap strands of wool around them, a potent and immediate declaration of her primary domestic role. In the Roman world, spinning and weaving wool were the quintessential tasks of the virtuous matrona, the hallmarks of a well-ordered household. By marking the doorway with the raw material of her future labor, she was ritually claiming this domain as the place where she would fulfill her duty. Along with the wool, she would anoint the doorposts with wolf's fat or olive oil. The wolf's fat was a powerful, primal substance invoking the protection of Mars, the same god invoked by the spear that had parted her hair, now asked to guard the peace of the home. The olive oil, on the other hand, was a classic symbol of prosperity, peace, and divine favor. This combined act transformed the doorway from a mere entrance into a consecrated space, blessed for abundance and protected from any malevolent forces that might attempt to follow her in. The most iconic and carefully choreographed moment came next. The bride was not permitted to walk across the threshold on her own 2 feet. Instead, she had to be lifted and carried over by her new husband or by several of the wedding attendants. This was not a romantic gesture, but a crucial precaution born of deep-seated fear. The Romans, like many ancient cultures, believed that thresholds were particularly dangerous places, haunted by restless spirits and rife with bad luck. For the bride to trip or stumble as she entered her new home for the first time was considered a catastrophic omen, a sign from the gods that the marriage was doomed to failure, poverty, or barrenness. By physically lifting her, the groom was ensuring a flawless, unimpeded entry, symbolically preventing any misfortune from taking root at this most critical juncture. This ritual of being carried also spoke volumes about the nature of her transition. The imagery is potent. She is passive, lifted and moved by the men who now hold authority over her life. It symbolized her reluctant entrance into this new domain, a physical manifestation of the legal transfer of manus that had been agreed upon hours earlier. She was not entering as an equal partner, but as someone being formally delivered. The act acknowledged the profound vulnerability of her position, leaving behind the known gods of her father's house to embrace the unfamiliar layers and penates of her husband's home. Yet, within this vulnerability, there was also a sense of sacred care. The groom and his attendants weren't just handling a piece of property. They were safeguarding a crucial human link in the family's chain, ensuring her safe passage into the heart of the household where she would hopefully bear the next generation of citizens. Once safely inside, the ritual of welcome continued with the bride's symbolic introduction to the 2 most important elements of her new domestic life: fire and water. Her husband would gently guide her to the hearth, the literal and spiritual center of the Roman home where the fire of the household burned perpetually. He would present her with a vessel of water and a torch, perhaps the very one that had led the procession. With these, she would kindle the first fire on her own new hearth. This act was profoundly significant. Fire and water were the essential elements of life, and by using them to light her first flame, she was taking on the role of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, within her own home. She was becoming the keeper of the family's vital center, the one responsible for its warmth, its light, and its cooking. This was the moment she truly, ritually, took possession of her new domain, transitioning from an outside bride to the internal mistress of the household. Finally, she was led to the marriage bed, the lectus genialis, upon which she and her husband had reclined during the feast. Here, the prayers for fertility that had been shouted crudely in the streets reached their solemn, sacred climax. With the guidance of the pranuba, the experienced matron who had escorted her, the bride and groom were formally seated together on the bed. The pranuba would then join their right hands once more, repeating the symbolic dextrum iunctio in this most intimate of settings. She might offer a final, quiet prayer to the gods of the household, asking for their blessing on the union and on the conception of children. This was the final act of the public ceremony, the last moment the couple was directly observed by the community before the door to the bridal chamber was closed. The guests would then finally depart, leaving the newlyweds alone, their union now fully consecrated by law, by public celebration, and by the private, hopeful rituals that had safely ushered the bride across the threshold and into the very heart of her new life. With the wedding guests finally departed and the door to the bridal chamber closed, you might assume the most intimate part of the celebration was a truly private affair. Yet in the Roman world, even the consummation of a marriage was a deeply social and ritualized act, framed by communal expectations and immense pressure. The moment the couple was left alone, they were not entirely free from the weight of the day's events. In fact, the final and most critical ritual of the entire wedding was just beginning, a test of legitimacy that would define the bride's honor and the marriage's future. This was not merely a private union between two people, but the necessary physical seal on a public contract, and the entire community had a vested interest in its successful completion. The experienced pranuba played her final, crucial role in this delicate transition. Before leaving the newlyweds, she did not simply close the door. Her duty was to prepare the couple, both practically and symbolically, for their first night together. She would guide them to the lectus genialis, the very same marriage bed that had served as their place of honor during the feast, now consecrated for its primary purpose. Her advice was likely direct and grounded in the realities of procreation, framed by her status as a respected univera. She embodied the societal ideal, a woman who had been successfully married only once, and her guidance was meant to ease the inevitable anxiety of the bride, transforming a potentially daunting experience into a sanctioned, sacred duty. Her presence in the chamber, however brief, served as a bridge, connecting the public spectacle of the wedding to the private act that would validate it, ensuring the couple understood their responsibility not just to each other, but to their families and the future lineage. Outside the chamber door, the line between public celebration and private life remained provocatively blurred. It was a common tradition for the younger wedding guests, particularly the groom's friends and male relatives, to linger in the hallway or just outside the home. They would not remain silent. Instead, they would sing one final round of ribald, humorous songs, a continuation of the fescennine verses from the procession. This noisy serenade served multiple purposes. On one level, the racket was a final, boisterous effort to scare off any lingering evil spirits that might attempt to sabotage the marriage at this most vulnerable moment. More profoundly, however, the singing was a form of communal witness. The sound of their voices pressing against the door was a constant, audible reminder to the couple inside that they were not alone. The success of their union was a matter of public concern. The community was, in a symbolic sense, standing guard, ensuring the vital act of consummation was carried out, thus finalizing the contract everyone had celebrated hours earlier. The most intense societal pressure, however, rested squarely and unforgivingly on the bride. Roman society placed an enormous premium on female premarital chastity, and the wedding night was the ultimate test. The bride was expected to be a virgin, and the consummation was anticipated to provide physical proof of that virtue. The following morning, she was required to present tangible evidence of her virginity, typically in the form of blood-stained bed linens. This was not a quiet, embarrassed secret between husband and wife. In a stark and deeply revealing ritual, these linens were often displayed to the groom's family, and sometimes even to members of her own family who had gathered the next day. This public exhibition served as undeniable proof of the bride's purity and, by extension, the legitimacy of any child conceived from that night forward. For a young woman, this practice created an atmosphere of immense anxiety. Her entire worth and honor, cultivated over a lifetime, hinged on this single physical sign. A failure to provide the expected evidence could lead to catastrophic consequences: immediate repudiation by the husband, a humiliating return to her father's house in disgrace, and the likely forfeiture of the substantial dowry her family had paid. Her personal reputation would be shattered, and her prospects for a future marriage severely damaged. This ritual transformed the most intimate aspect of her life into a public spectacle of verification, reducing her moral character to a biological fact. It was the ultimate expression of a system that viewed a woman's body as the vessel for a legitimate bloodline, and her purity as a commodity whose value had to be certified before the marriage could be considered fully complete and socially secure. This overwhelming focus on the bride's virginity highlights a fundamental double standard in Roman marital values. While a bride was scrutinized for her chastity, no such expectation was formally placed on the groom. His premarital sexual experiences, particularly with enslaved individuals or social inferiors, were generally tolerated and often expected as a part of his transition to manhood. This disparity underscores the core economic and social function of Roman marriage. The husband's lineage and citizenship were the prized assets being protected. By ensuring the bride entered the marriage untouched, the husband's family received a guarantee that any heir she produced was unquestionably his, safeguarding the inheritance of property, name, and civic status for the next generation. The wedding night, therefore, was less about romantic intimacy and more about a cold, legal authentication, a necessary step to secure the patriarchal line and the material wealth that accompanied it. The morning sun would have streamed into a home that felt utterly transformed, the air still carrying the faint scent of incense and spilled wine from the night before. For the bride, this was the first dawn of her new life, a day dedicated to proving the success of the wedding night and ritually cementing her place within her husband's family. Her first and most solemn duty was to emerge and make her first offering at the new household's hearth. This was not a casual gesture, it was a profound religious act. As the fire she had kindled the previous night now burned steadily, she would approach it with offerings of simple food, perhaps a cake or a few grains of wheat, praying to the household gods, the lares and penates, for their acceptance and protection. This single act formally installed her as the new mistress of the domestic cult, the priestess of the home's sacred flame. By tending the hearth, she was taking on the spiritual mantle of Vesta within her own walls, a responsibility as crucial to the family's well-being as her future role as a mother. This spiritual integration was immediately followed by a powerful, visible change in her identity. The elaborate Sine Crines hairstyle and the fiery flammeum veil were now set aside. In their place, she would don the stola, the long, sleeveless dress that was the exclusive and unmistakable badge of the Roman matrona, the respected married woman. Unlike the ritual-specific wedding attire, the stola was her new everyday uniform, a garment she would wear for the rest of her life as a visible sign of her honor and status. To be seen in public wearing a stola was to command respect. It signaled to all of society that she was a virtuous, freeborn woman, legally married to a Roman citizen and under his protection. This change of clothing was the final, definitive step in her social metamorphosis. The girl who had processed through the streets as a glowing, veiled symbol of potential was gone, replaced by a woman dressed in the sober, dignified uniform of achieved status and civic duty. With her religious and sartorial duties complete, the social ceremonies of the day began, centered around a second feast known as the Reposha. Hosted by the groom's family, this luncheon or dinner was a more subdued but equally significant affair. Its purpose was to formally present the new bride, now clearly dressed in her stola, to her husband's wider circle of relatives, friends, and political allies. Where the previous night's feast had been a raucous celebration of the union itself, the Reposha was a calm and deliberate introduction of a new member into an established network. She was no longer a guest from another family. She was now one of them, and this event served to weave her into the social fabric that would support her and her future children. Guests would offer their formal congratulations, not just on the marriage, but on her successful transition, publicly acknowledging her new place among them. The atmosphere at this second feast was also a crucial test of the bride's character and upbringing. All eyes would be upon her, but now the scrutiny was different. The community was watching to see how she comported herself as a matrona. Did she carry herself with the modest dignity the stola represented? Was she gracious to her new relatives? Could she engage in polite conversation, demonstrating the education and social polish expected of a woman in her position? This was her debut into her husband's world, and a positive impression here could secure her a foundation of respect and goodwill that would last for years. A misstep, however, could lead to whispered criticism and a more difficult path to social acceptance. The pressure was immense, but success meant she would be fully embraced, completing the long and arduous journey from her father's daughter to her husband's wife, and a recognized matrona of Rome. This intricate tapestry of rituals, from the sponsalia to the morning after, was all designed to enact a specific type of legal bond. But what's truly fascinating is that Roman law didn't prescribe just one kind of marriage. Instead, it offered a surprising menu of options, each with its own legal mechanism and social standing, perfectly reflecting the pragmatic and stratified nature of Roman society itself. The three primary forms were usus, coemptio, and conferatio, and the choice between them determined everything from a wife's legal independence to the difficulty of obtaining a divorce, revealing a system that was far more flexible and calculated than you might expect. Let's begin with the most common and perhaps most relatable form, known as usus. This was, in essence, a common law marriage established not by a grand ceremony, but simply by cohabitation. If a man and a woman lived together for an entire year without being separated for more than 3 consecutive nights, their union was automatically recognized as a legal marriage under Roman law. This was an incredibly accessible and straightforward path for ordinary citizens, especially those without the means for a lavish celebration or a large dowry. It provided a legal framework for couples who had built a life together, granting their children the coveted status of legitimacy and ensuring property rights were clearly defined. However, this convenience came with a specific legal catch related to the concept of manus, the husband's authority. Under standard uses, the wife would automatically fall into her husband's manus after the year of uninterrupted cohabitation. But the law offered a clever loophole. If the woman absented herself for just 3 consecutive nights each year, she could reset the clock, thereby remaining under the legal authority of her original father and maintaining a degree of financial independence from her husband. This practice, known as trinicidem, was a powerful tool, particularly for women from wealthy families who wished to keep their own property and inheritance separate from their husband's control, showcasing a surprising element of legal agency within an otherwise patriarchal system. For those who desired a more formal and deliberate enactment of the husband's authority, there was coemptio. The name itself means a buying together, and this form of marriage was structured as a symbolic sale of the bride. In a ritual performed before 5 witnesses and a libribans, a man holding a bronze scale, the groom would solemnly pay a nominal price for his bride. He wouldn't hand over a sack of gold. The transaction was completed with a single bronze coin, which he would place on the scale. This coin wasn't a real purchase price, it was a powerful legal fiction. By going through the motions of a sale, the families were enacting the transfer of the woman from her father's potestas into the manus of her new husband in a way that was immediate and unambiguous. The ritual was direct, legally robust, and avoided the yearly loophole of usus. For many families, especially those of the equestrian or prosperous plebeian classes, coemptio provided a perfect balance. It was less extravagantly religious than the elite conferitio, but more formally binding than simple usus. It served as a public and legally solid declaration that the wife was now fully integrated into her husband's family, both socially and economically, making it a popular choice for securing a clear and undisputed transfer of authority. At the very peak of the social and religious pyramid sat conferitio, the oldest, most sacred, and most exclusive form of Roman marriage. Its name derives from far, the spelt wheat used to bake a special sacred cake, the libum ferium. This was not merely a wedding cake for eating. It was a central sacrificial offering made to Jupiter Ferius, the most supreme god of the Roman state. A marriage by conferitio was as much a public religious ceremony as it was a private union, requiring the presence of the Pontifex Maximus, the chief high priest of Rome, and the Flamen Dialis, the special priest of Jupiter. The ritual was steeped in archaic formality, with the couple seated on 2 chairs covered by a single sheepskin, sharing the spelt cake as a symbol of their life together under the direct watch of the king of the gods. This form of marriage was essentially mandatory for patrician families, particularly those who held certain ancient priesthoods that required the officiant to be the product of such a sacred union. The immense prestige of conferitio, however, came with a tremendous and deliberate cost. It was notoriously difficult to dissolve. While divorce became relatively straightforward for other forms of marriage, untying the knot of a conferitio union required an equally complex and religiously daunting procedure known as differitio. This involved another elaborate ceremony with priests, but this time the rituals were inverted, effectively consecrating the marriage in the eyes of the gods. The difficulty of this process meant that a marriage by conferitio was often for life, a feature designed to protect the purity and stability of the most ancient and powerful aristocratic bloodlines. This near indissoluble bond ensured that the heirs of these families and the priests they produced were unquestionably legitimate, safeguarding the religious and political integrity of the state itself. The existence of these three distinct paths, the informal usus, the contractual coemptio, and the sacral conferitio, beautifully illustrates the Roman genius for creating a legal system that could accommodate everyone, from the poorest commoner to the most exalted patrician, all while meticulously reinforcing the social hierarchy that kept their world in order. Yet for all this talk of contracts and strategic alliances, it would be a profound mistake to paint every Roman marriage as a cold, loveless transaction. The legal and social framework was undoubtedly pragmatic, but within those rigid structures, the human heart still found its way. While romantic love was not the foundation for marriage, it could very well become its beautiful, unexpected result. We have moving evidence from personal letters, heartfelt poetry, and poignant tombstone inscriptions that reveal deep reservoirs of affection, genuine partnership, and even passionate love that flourished between some Roman spouses, proving that emotion and institution were not always mutually exclusive. One of the most compelling windows into this world of marital affection comes from the letters of Pliny the Younger, a successful lawyer and senator of the early 2nd century. His correspondence about his third wife, Calpurnia, is breathtaking in its tenderness and reveals a relationship built on mutual respect and deep emotional connection. He doesn't write of her as a mere manager of his household, but as a cherished intellectual partner. He describes how she eagerly reads his speeches and sets his verses to music, her love for him growing through her engagement with his work. In one particularly touching letter, he laments her absence while she is away convalescing, confessing that he spends nights awake with worry, pacing the places where he used to walk with her, and finding his empty house feels cold and desolate without her presence. He writes, quote, "My love for you is far beyond belief. I cannot bear the pain of your being away. This is not the language of a man fulfilling a duty. It is the raw, vulnerable language of a man deeply in love with his wife, a partnership of minds and hearts that transcends the arranged nature of their union." Beyond the elite circles of senators, the voices of ordinary Romans speak just as powerfully from their gravestones. Walking through the ruins of an ancient cemetery, you would find countless epitaphs commissioned by grieving spouses, and their words often overflow with a sense of personal loss that feels instantly familiar. One famous inscription for a woman named Claudia reads, "Friend, I have not much to say. Stop and read it. This is the unlovely tomb of a lovely woman." Her parents gave her the name Claudia. She loved her husband in her heart. She bore 2 sons, one of whom she left on earth, the other beneath it. She was pleasant to talk with, and she walked with grace. She kept the house and worked in wool. That is all, you may go. This simple, elegant tribute captures an entire life of shared experience, love, loss, domestic harmony, and a profound sense of partnership. It's a snapshot of a real marriage, one that clearly involved more than just procreation and duty. It involved walking through life together with grace and affection. The poetry of the late Republic and early Empire also provides a rich, if sometimes idealized, tapestry of marital love. The elegiac poet Propertius, for instance, while known for his tumultuous affairs, also touches on the ideal of a faithful, loving marriage. But perhaps the most striking evidence comes from funerary epigrams that celebrate the longevity of a union. One husband commemorates 50 years of marriage to his wife, calling her a rare and faithful spouse, and expressing his devastation that death has parted them after a lifetime together. Another, a soldier, writes an epitaph for his young wife, praising her modesty, fidelity, and the sweetness of her companionship, mourning the future they will never have. These are not generic platitudes. They are intensely personal expressions of grief that only make sense if a genuine bond of love and companionship had existed. They show that within the confines of the matrimonium, couples could and did build something uniquely their own, a private world of shared jokes, quiet understanding, and resilient affection that could last a lifetime. This development of companionship was often a natural byproduct of a shared life, especially as Rome evolved from a small republic into a vast, complex empire. In the sprawling, anonymous metropolis that Rome became, a husband and wife could increasingly become each other's primary confidant and emotional anchor. They faced the challenges of life, business, politics, and raising a family as a team. For a woman like Calpurnia, her husband's world became her own, and her support was his bedrock. For a man, coming home to a wife who was not just the mother of his children, but also a trusted advisor and a source of comfort, transformed the household from a legal entity into a true sanctuary. The shared experiences of joy, sorrow, illness, and success wove a tapestry of intimacy that the original marriage contract could never have anticipated. The institution provided the loom, but the couple created the pattern together, thread by thread over many years. So we are left with a beautifully complex and deeply human picture. The Roman world acknowledged and even celebrated the potential for love within marriage, but it saw that love as a fortunate outgrowth of a successful union, not its prerequisite. A good marriage was one that produced children, maintained social order, and secured property. A great marriage did all that, and also fostered concordia, harmony, agreement, and a deep-seated partnership. The love revealed in Pliny's letters or on a soldier's tombstone is all the more powerful precisely because it flourished within a system that did not demand it. It was a personal triumph over social expectation, a testament to the enduring human capacity for connection, proving that even in a world ruled by duty and contract, the heart could not be so easily bound by law. But this financial framework, so often viewed simply as a price paid for a bride, had another, more nuanced dimension that functioned as a woman's primary economic life raft in a world that gave her few legal rights. The dowry, or das, was not an outright gift to the groom's family. It was a complex financial instrument, a transfer of wealth with strings firmly attached. While the husband gained the right to manage and use the dowry's assets during the marriage, its legal ownership was a different matter entirely. In the eyes of Roman law, the capital of the dowry technically remained the property of the wife, or in some cases, was still held in trust by her original family. This crucial distinction meant the dowry was not swallowed up by the husband's estate, but was designated for a specific, vital purpose, to support the wife's maintenance and lifestyle within the marriage. It paid for her clothing, her personal attendance, and her share of the household's expenses, ensuring her standard of living matched the social status she brought to the union. This setup created a fascinating balance of power and dependency. A husband could invest dowry funds in land, trade, or other ventures, enjoying the fruits of this capital, but he was legally forbidden from squandering it on frivolities or recklessly endangering the principal. He was, in effect, a steward of his wife's wealth. If he mismanaged the funds so badly that the dowry's value was significantly depleted, his wife's family could bring a legal action against him for dissipation of the das. This was a powerful check on a husband's financial power, protecting the wife from being impoverished by a profligate spouse. The dowry, therefore, was not just a one-time payment for a bride. It was an ongoing economic partnership where the wife's financial contribution gave her a tangible, legally recognized stake in the household's prosperity, offering a layer of security in a system where she had little direct control. The most powerful demonstration of the dowry's role as a safety net came at the dissolution of a marriage, whether through divorce or the husband's death. Roman law was remarkably explicit and rigorous on this point. The dowry had to be returned. In the case of divorce, the rules for restitution were meticulously detailed and depended heavily on who was at fault for the marriage's failure. If the wife was the cause of the divorce through adultery, for example, the husband could retain a portion of the dowry as a penalty. A sixth of the dowry could be kept for each child of the marriage, up to a maximum of half the total value, a provision meant to support the children who remained in their father's household. However, if the husband was at fault for the divorce, or if the separation was mutually agreed upon, the entire dowry had to be returned to the wife or her family, and often within a very short, strict time frame. This legal obligation to return the dowry transformed it from a mere transaction into a profound form of financial protection. For a divorced woman, the return of her dowry was her means of survival. It allowed her to support herself independently or provided the necessary capital for her family to arrange another, hopefully more successful, marriage. Without it, a divorced woman could be left destitute, forced to rely on the often grudging charity of her male relatives. The law even provided mechanisms to enforce this return. A woman's father, who often acted as her legal representative, could bring a lawsuit known as the actio rei uxoriae to reclaim the dowry. The very existence of this legal pathway gave a woman and her family significant leverage, ensuring that a husband could not simply cast out his wife and keep her money, a practice that prevented countless women from being abandoned without resources. Upon the death of a husband, the dowry's fate was equally secure, but it followed a different path, one that highlights its deep connection to the children of the marriage. When a husband died, the dowry did not automatically become part of his general estate to be divided among all his heirs. Instead, it was typically deducted from the estate first. The primary purpose was to provide for the widow, but its ultimate destination was often her children. If there were children, the dowry was frequently retained by the wife, but it was understood that this wealth would eventually pass to those same children as their inheritance. This system ingeniously ensured that the wealth the wife had brought into the marriage was recycled to support the next generation, her own biological legacy. If the marriage had been childless, the dowry would be returned in full to the wife or her family of origin, preventing her husband's relatives from absorbing wealth that was never truly theirs. This intricate legal dance around the dowry reveals its true nature as a cornerstone of a Roman woman's economic agency. In a society that systematically limited women's rights to own property, make contracts, or represent themselves in court independently, the dowry was the glaring exception. It was a legally enforced financial reservoir in her name. A large dowry could give a woman considerable informal influence within her marriage, as a husband would be acutely aware that alienating her could lead to a costly divorce and the loss of that capital. For her family, the dowry was a way to ensure their daughter would be treated with care, knowing that mistreatment could result in the financial penalty of its return. Thus, within the rigid confines of a patriarchal legal structure, the dowry emerged as a surprisingly sophisticated tool. It was a negotiated instrument of power, a legally protected fund for a woman's sustenance, and a vital safety net that caught her if her marriage fell apart, proving that even in ancient Rome, economics could sometimes carve out a space for a woman's security and influence. While the path to a Roman marriage was paved with intricate rituals, legal hurdles, and weeks of superstitious planning, the exit ramp was, by comparison, startlingly simple and direct. If the wedding was a grand, multi-act public drama, divorce was often a brief, pragmatic memo. The Romans, with their famously practical legal minds, viewed marriage as a dissoluble contract, and they built mechanisms for its orderly termination right in the system. This stark contrast reveals a core truth. The immense effort poured into the wedding was about securing a lineage and a social alliance. But the union itself was never intended to be an indestructible sacred bond for everyone. Its stability was desirable, but its potential failure was a recognized social reality for which the law was fully prepared. The most common method of ending a marriage was through a declaration known as repudium, a formal message of rejection or dismissal. What's truly remarkable is that either spouse, in theory, had the right to initiate this process. A husband could repudiate his wife, and under certain conditions, a wife or her paterfamilias could repudiate her husband. The procedure could be as simple as one party verbally declaring to the other, "Take your things for yourself," a phrase that legally signaled the end of the shared life. In many cases, especially among the elite, this wasn't even a dramatic, face-to-face confrontation. A husband might simply send a messenger to his wife, who was perhaps visiting her family, carrying a written note that formally severed the marriage. This administrative approach underscores the contractual view. A partnership was being dissolved, not a soulmate bond being broken. For a marriage with Manus, where the wife was fully in her husband's legal control, the process was slightly more complex, involving a ritual reversal of the ceremony that had transferred her, but the underlying principle of deliberate, formal separation remained. To make the dissolution ironclad and prevent future legal disputes over the status of the marriage or the dowry, a more formal route was often preferred. This involved a clear mutual agreement documented in the presence of witnesses. The couple or their legal representatives would effectively draw up a divorce agreement, a document that might explicitly state the separation of goods and the terms for the dowry's return. Having 7 witnesses sign this document made the divorce legally unambiguous. This practice was especially crucial for the wealthy, where vast sums and property were at stake. Imagine a scene in a Roman villa, not of tears and shouting, but of a sober business meeting where 2 families, with scribes and witnesses present, formally untangled their financial and social lives. This process provided a clean, legally defensible break, ensuring that both parties could move on without the lingering threat of a lawsuit over whether the marriage was truly over. Despite this legal accessibility, the social consequences of divorce fell much more heavily on women than on men, reflecting the deep-seated double standards of the ancient world. For a Roman man, divorce was often a socially neutral event, or could even enhance his reputation if he was seen to be casting off an adulterous or disreputable wife. A senator could divorce and remarry multiple times with little to no damage to his political career. In fact, serial marriages could be a tool for forging successive political alliances. For a woman, however, the stakes were immeasurably higher. Her social value was inextricably linked to her reputation for chastity and her honor as a matrona. A divorced woman, especially one repudiated by her husband, immediately faced public scrutiny and suspicion. Was she infertile? Had she been unfaithful? Was her character flawed? This gossip could severely damage her prospects for a remarriage, the very safety net she might need for her future survival. The one exception to this grim social picture was if a woman was divorced through the direct action of her paterfamilias. Her father retained the right to dissolve her marriage, even against her will, if he decided it was no longer advantageous to the family. A father might recall a daughter from her husband's house to marry her into a more politically useful or wealthier family. In this scenario, the social stigma was lessened because the woman was seen as obeying her father's authority, the highest virtue of pietas. However, this also highlights her precarious position as a pawn in a lifelong game between powerful men. Her personal happiness was secondary to the strategic needs of her birth family, and her life could be uprooted not once, but multiple times, at the command of her father. The single most critical practical outcome of any Roman divorce, cutting across all social classes, was the fate of the dowry. Its return was not a matter of polite request but a stringent legal obligation, governed by precise rules that considered fault. The entire process of recovering the dowry was so fundamental that it had its own specific legal action, the actio rei uxorii, if the divorce occurred due to the husband's fault, such as his adultery, cruelty, or immoral life. The wife was entitled to the full and immediate return of her entire dowry. This was a powerful financial disincentive for a man to behave badly. However, if the wife was deemed at fault, the husband was legally permitted to retain a portion of the dowry as a penalty. The law allowed him to keep 1/6 for each child of the marriage, up to a maximum of 3/6, or half of the total dowry. These deductions were intended to cover the costs of raising the children, who typically remained in their father's household. This intricate system of financial penalties and reimbursements reveals the dowry's ultimate role as a woman's primary economic safeguard. For a divorced woman, the successful return of her dowry was the difference between independence and destitution. It provided her with the means to support herself while living with her birth family, or gave her the financial clout to enter the marriage market again. The legal requirement for its return, enforced by the threat of a lawsuit from her male relatives, gave a wife and her family a powerful form of leverage. A husband knew that mistreating his wife or provoking a divorce without cause would result in a significant financial blow, the sudden loss of the capital that had likely been funding his lifestyle or investments. The dowry, therefore, was far more than a bride price. It was a sophisticated instrument of power and protection, a legally enforced check on a husband's conduct that provided a crucial measure of security in a world that offered women few formal rights. Now, while we've been immersed in the world of togas, dowries, and sacred spelt cakes, it is crucial to remember that this entire intricate performance, the legal contracts, the protective rituals, the public processions, was a privilege reserved exclusively for Roman citizens. For a vast portion of the population, the enslaved individuals who formed the very backbone of the Roman economy and household, the concept of a legally recognized marriage simply did not exist. Their relationships, their families, and their most intimate bonds existed in a shadow world, entirely subject to the absolute power of their master. For them, there was no matrimonium, only contubernium, a term that translates literally to tenting together, a word that evokes the transient, fragile partnerships of soldiers in a military camp, utterly devoid of the legal and religious sanctity granted to citizens. This institution of contubernium was a stark and brutal reflection of the enslaved person's status as property, not a person under the law. Unlike a citizen marriage, which created a new legal family unit, a union in contubernium created no legal bonds whatsoever between the partners. It was a factual circumstance, a cohabitation permitted, or often actively encouraged by the master, but it carried no rights, no protections, and no permanence. The enslaved couple could not exchange vows before 10 citizen witnesses because their word held no legal weight. There was no dowry to negotiate, for they owned nothing, not even themselves. The entire arrangement was a matter of utility and control for the slaveholder, a way to manage the enslaved population, encourage reproduction to create more human property, and provide a semblance of stability that could make the enslaved more compliant and less likely to rebel. The most heart-wrenching consequence of this system was the absolute power the master held over the family unit. A couple in contubernium lived with the constant, terrifying knowledge that their relationship could be shattered in an instant. The master could, at a whim, sell the man, the woman, or any children away to different owners, severing familial bonds forever with a simple business transaction. There were no courts to appeal to, no laws to protect the sanctity of their union. Archaeological evidence brings this tragedy to life. We find poignant tombstone inscriptions set up by enslaved individuals for their contubernales, their partner. These stones often express a deep personal grief and love, but they also frequently carry a haunting phrase, sine contumelia, meaning without insult or without shame, a proud but sad declaration that their relationship was conducted with honor, even if the law refused to acknowledge it. This tells us that while the state denied them the dignity of marriage, the individuals within these bonds fought to create their own moral and emotional world, asserting their humanity in the only ways left available to them. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of contubernium was the fate of the children. In a citizen marriage, the birth of a child was a celebrated event that secured the family line and produced a new Roman citizen. For an enslaved couple, the birth of a child was a transaction that enriched their master. Under the legal principle of partus sequitur ventrum, the offspring follows the womb. Any child born to an enslaved woman was automatically born into slavery, becoming the property of her master, regardless of the status of the father. This law created an unending, self-replenishing cycle of human property. Masters had a direct financial incentive to encourage or even force these unions, as every child represented a future worker who could be used, sold, or rented out. The natural human desire to build a family was, for the enslaved, cynically co-opted into a brutal engine of economic production for their owners. This stark division between matrimonium and contubernium serves as one of the most powerful illustrations of the vast social chasm that defined Roman society. The ability to form a legally protected family, to know that your children would be citizens and your union secure from arbitrary dissolution, was one of the ultimate markers of Roman liberty. It was a privilege that citizens guarded fiercely. For the enslaved, the denial of this fundamental human right was a core component of their oppression. It meant that their most intimate relationships were always provisional. Their love was perpetually threatened, and their children were never truly their own. Understanding this harsh reality is essential to seeing Roman society in its complete, often brutal, context. The glittering world of citizen weddings, with all its elaborate ritual and legal precision, was built upon a foundation that explicitly denied those same comforts to a huge segment of the population, reminding us that the grandeur of Rome was inseparable from the profound human cost required to sustain it. But to truly grasp the outer limits of a Roman wedding, we must ascend to the very pinnacle of society and witness an event where personal union and statecraft became one and the same, the imperial wedding. When an emperor married, the entire intricate system of rituals, superstitions, and legalities was magnified to a breathtaking scale, transforming a private contract into a monumental political spectacle designed to dazzle the empire and cement a dynasty. Consider the fascinating case of Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, and his marriage to Livia Drusilla. This was a union forged not in the calm waters of tradition, but in the white-hot urgency of civil war. Octavian, locked in a brutal power struggle, forced Livia's husband, Tiberius Claudius Nero, to divorce her while she was actually pregnant with her second child. The wedding itself, celebrated in 38 BC, was likely a surprisingly hasty and private affair by imperial standards. There was no time for the months of astrological consultations and lavish public feasting. This was a swift, ruthless political maneuver. Octavian needed to secure an alliance with her powerful Claudian family immediately, and the traditional rituals were compressed into a necessary formality to legitimize a union that was, at its heart, a bold and shocking act of realpolitik. Yet even this expedited marriage had to be cloaked in the vestments of tradition to be acceptable. The core rituals would have been observed: the joining of hands, the witnessing citizens, the essential prayers to the gods. But the real ceremony was the political statement it made. By marrying Livia, Octavian wasn't just gaining a wife. He was weaving a key rival faction directly into his own power base, neutralizing a threat and gaining a partner renowned for her intelligence and political acumen. Their long and stable marriage, which became a cornerstone of his public image as a restorer of traditional morality, shows how a union that began in scandal could be rehabilitated into a symbol of imperial virtue. This was the ultimate repurposing of the wedding's social function, a tool for consolidating power in a fractured world, proving that even the most personal of acts could be a decisive move on the political chessboard. In stark contrast, the weddings of later, more established emperors were exercises in overwhelming, deliberate extravagance, designed not just to celebrate but to intimidate. Imagine the marriage of a 3rd century emperor like Elagabalus, whose unions were deliberately bizarre and meant to shock the senatorial class, or the ceremonies of the stable 4th century emperors in Constantinople, which were dazzling displays of the empire's enduring wealth. These were not merely parties, they were state-sponsored propaganda events. The processions would have snaked through the forum not with a few hundred well-wishers, but with thousands of soldiers, officials, and foreign dignitaries in attendance. The wedding torch would have been a colossal beacon, its light visible across the city, and the feast would have been a public distribution of food and coin to the entire population of Rome, a direct purchase of popular goodwill. Every detail was calibrated to project an image of boundless power and eternal prosperity, reinforcing the emperor's role as the paternal benefactor of the entire Roman world. At the heart of these imperial spectacles lay the relentless drive to secure a dynasty. For an emperor, producing a legitimate male heir was the paramount political objective, the only way to avoid a destructive civil war upon his death. An imperial wedding was therefore a live broadcast of the future, a performance of continuity that everyone from a common legionary to a rival senator was watching closely. The bride was chosen not for love, but for the purity of her bloodline, the power of her family connections, and her proven or presumed fertility. When she was led to the palace, her procession was a collective sigh of relief for the empire, a hope that the chaos of a succession crisis could be averted. The pressure on her was immense. Her body became, in a very literal sense, state property, and the rituals of the wedding night were less about personal intimacy and more about the future of the Western world. This transforms the traditional Roman focus on legitimate children from a family concern into a matter of global stability. Despite this monumental scale and high-stakes political theater, what is truly remarkable is how these imperial weddings still clung to the ancient, core rituals we've already explored. The emperor, for all his power, still had to grasp his bride's right hand in the dextrum iunctio. He still had to recite the traditional vows before 10 citizen witnesses, though those witnesses were now the most powerful consuls and senators in the empire. The bride, even if she were a princess from a foreign kingdom, would still be dressed in the tunica recta and the fiery flammeum, her hair parted with a sacred spear. This deliberate adherence to form was crucial. It anchored the emperor's potentially terrifying power in the familiar, comforting bedrock of Roman tradition. By performing the same rites as a common citizen, he presented himself not as a distant autocrat, but as the ultimate paterfamilias of the Roman family, a man who honored the mos maiorum, the ways of the ancestors. This careful balance between colossal spectacle and intimate ritual was the genius of the imperial system, using the past to legitimize a revolutionary new present, proving that even an emperor's power was, in its own way, bound by the timeless traditions of Rome. This incredible journey through Roman wedding customs we've taken so far, from the legal negotiations to the torch-lit processions, might feel like a story pieced together from ancient texts. But what if you could actually hold a piece of that story in your hand? The world of archaeology turns these vivid descriptions into tangible reality, giving us priceless objects and images that let us see these rituals through Roman eyes. Some of the most evocative treasures to survive 2 millennia are the stunning gold betrothal rings, often engraved with the words animus and pignus, spirit and pledge. This simple, profound phrase captures the very essence of the sponsalia, the moment when 2 people pledged their hearts and their future to one another. The imagery on these rings is even more telling. A particularly popular design features 2 clasped right hands, a direct, miniature representation of the dextrum iunctio ceremony we discussed. Holding such a ring, you can almost feel the weight of that moment when the couple stood before their families and joined hands to seal their contract. Other rings take the symbolism further, showing the clasped hands holding a tiny heart, or sometimes even including small portraits of the bride and groom. These weren't just pieces of jewelry, they were wearable legal and emotional documents, a constant personal reminder of the vow made. For a society that placed immense importance on the spoken word and the symbolic gesture, these rings were the perfect fusion of law, love, and public declaration, a silent promise worn on the finger thought to be directly connected to the heart. Moving from the promise to the wedding day itself, we have the rare and fascinating survival of the marriage belt. While bridal veils and tunics have long since turned to dust, several ornate gold marriage belts have been discovered in archaeological contexts, often in the graves of wealthy women. Intricately worked with patterns of Hercules knots, these belts are the physical manifestation of the nodus herculaneus we learned about. Tying this complex knot around the bride's waist was a public prayer for the strength and protection of the household, and the fact that these golden versions were preserved suggests they were cherished heirlooms. To see one is to understand that the rituals weren't just abstract ideas. They involved real, beautiful, and expensive objects that a bride would have felt against her skin, a tangible link to the sacred duties she was undertaking as she transformed into a matrona. For a true explosion of color and life, however, we must turn to the walls of Pompeii and Herculaneum, frozen in time by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Here, frescoes bring the wedding feast and procession to life in breathtaking detail. In one famous scene from the house of the baker, we see a couple seated together, likely on the lectus genialis, the sacred marriage couch. The groom holds a scroll, perhaps symbolizing the marriage contract, while the bride sits beside him, her expression serene. In another painting, we might see a veiled figure being gently guided in a scene that perfectly mirrors the deductio. These aren't generic party scenes. They are specific, personal commemorations of the most important day in a couple's life, painted directly onto the walls of their home. They were a permanent celebration, a daily reminder for the family, and a public announcement to every visitor of the legitimate and prosperous union that existed within. Beyond the gold and the pigments, some of the most powerful evidence comes not from art, but from words carved in stone. Funerary inscriptions found all across the empire give us the direct, unmediated voices of the Romans themselves, speaking about love and loss. While many are simple, some are deeply moving testaments to decades of shared life. One husband commemorated 50 years with his wife, writing, "She was my wife. I give you my word, she was a rare and faithful spouse." Another inscription for a woman named Turia, though much longer, tells the story of a marriage that survived civil war, exile, and profound personal sacrifice, with the husband praising her unwavering loyalty and partnership. These stones, often set up by grieving husbands, consistently praise the very virtues the wedding rituals were designed to foster: fidelity, wool-working, obedience, and friendship. They are the ultimate proof that within the rigid framework of matrimonium, deep and abiding love and respect were not only possible, but were celebrated as the highest achievement of her Roman life. This physical evidence, the rings, the belts, the paintings, and the epitaphs, does more than just confirm what the written sources tell us. It adds a layer of profound humanity that texts alone can miss. A law code can describe the legal requirement for the dextrum iunctio, but a gold ring with two clasped hands shows us the personal pride and affection invested in that symbol. A poet like Juvenal can satirize marital strife, but a tombstone celebrating a golden anniversary shows us the quiet, enduring reality that countered it. Archaeology allows us to touch the past, to see the glint of gold that once caught the torchlight on a bride's finger, and to read the words of a husband who truly mourned his partner. It bridges the gap of 12 years, transforming the Roman wedding from a historical curiosity into a relatable human experience, filled with the same hopes, promises, and cherished memories that define our most important relationships today. After exploring the grand spectacles of imperial unions and the tangible artifacts they left behind, we now arrive at a crucial juncture separating the vivid historical reality from the layers of modern myth that so often obscure it. Hollywood has painted a very specific and frequently misleading picture of a Roman wedding, one filled with images that feel instantly familiar but crumble under historical scrutiny. Let's clear the air and debunk some of the most persistent misconceptions, reclaiming the authentic picture from the simplified fiction. This isn't just about correcting details. It's about understanding the profound cultural logic that made a Roman wedding so distinct from our own modern ceremonies. One of the most universal and visually striking errors in film and television is the attire. The modern imagination consistently drapes everyone, from the groom to the guests, in pristine white togas. While the groom and male citizens certainly would have worn their finest togas as a mark of their civic status, the bride's ensemble was a world apart from this monochrome sea of white. As we've discovered, She was a riot of symbolic color and texture. Her foundation was the simple, off-white tunica recta, but the centerpiece was the breathtaking flammeum, a large, translucent veil of a vibrant, fiery saffron yellow. This wasn't a subtle accent. It was a dominant, luminous feature designed to make her the visual focal point, a walking symbol of fertility and divine favor. Her hair was an architectural marvel of 6 braids, the Sini crines, crowned with a wreath of fresh flowers and sacred herbs. So, while a movie set might show a scene awash in white, the historical reality was far more vivid and symbolically charged, with the bride glowing like a flame at the heart of the celebration. The setting for these ceremonies is another area where popular culture consistently misses the mark. We are often shown couples exchanging vows before a robed priest in a grand, echoing temple, surrounded by columns and statues of the gods. This image is entirely anachronistic, projecting later religious traditions back onto a Roman world that operated very differently. The true heart of a Roman wedding was a domestic, not a temple-based affair. The central ceremony, the joining of hands and the recitation of vows, took place in the bride's own family home, typically in the atrium. There was no priest officiating. The legal and ritual power came from the families, the spoken vows, and the crucial presence of the 10 citizen witnesses. The gods were certainly invoked and appeased throughout the entire process, but they were addressed in the home, at the household shrine, not in a public temple. The Roman wedding was a private contract made publicly valid by community witness, not a sacrament administered by a centralized religious authority. This fundamental difference highlights the Roman view of the family as the primary social and religious unit, a concept that gets completely lost in the translation to a cinematic temple setting. Then there is the matter of the famous vow. How many times have you heard the phrase, "Where you are Gaius, I am Gaia," presented as the universal romantic pledge of every Roman couple? While this formula is authentically Roman, its use was almost certainly not the standard practice for every wedding across the empire. This specific vow, using the common praenomina Gaius and Gaia as placeholders, is documented in our sources, but it likely represents an archaic, idealized form. Think of it as the Roman equivalent of vowing, to have, and to hold from this day forward, a beautiful, traditional phrase that might be used in formal or particularly traditional ceremonies, but not the only words ever spoken. For most Romans, the vows were likely more direct and legalistic, a simple and clear expression of consent to the marriage contract. The romantic allure of "Ubi tu Gaius ego Gaia" has cemented its place in popular history, but in reality, the spoken words were probably as varied as the couples themselves, focused more on creating a binding legal obligation than on poetic expression. These cinematic simplifications, while often visually stunning, do a disservice to the intricate social machinery of the Roman world. When a film shows a wedding in a temple, it erases the profound importance of the Roman household and its autonomous religious power. When it dresses the bride in a white stola instead of a yellow veil, it obscures the deep, symbolic language of color and ritual that communicated her transition and future fertility. And when it focuses only on elite patrician ceremonies, it ignores the vast and varied experiences of the common people, the soldiers forbidden from marrying, and the enslaved individuals denied legal union altogether. By clinging to these myths, we flatten a complex, multifaceted society into a simple pageant, losing the very details that make it so fascinating and human. Understanding the truth behind these misconceptions ultimately empowers us. It allows us to look at the historical evidence with fresh eyes and appreciate the Roman wedding for what it truly was: a sophisticated blend of law, superstition, social strategy, and personal hope. It wasn't a generic ritual copied from a template, but a living, breathing institution that evolved over centuries, adapting to the needs of everyone from the emperor in his palace to the merchant in his city apartment. The next time you see a Roman wedding depicted on screen, you'll possess the knowledge to see past the Hollywood gloss and recognize the richer, more complex, and genuinely more compelling reality that lies beneath. You become the expert, able to discern the vibrant yellow veil through the imagined white togas and hear the echoes of a legal contract within the quiet of a family home, not the hollow silence of an empty temple. What's truly remarkable is that these ancient rituals, born 2,000 years ago in the heart of Rome, did not simply vanish with the fall of the empire. Instead, they transformed, traveling down through the centuries to emerge in our own modern wedding traditions, creating a direct and tangible link between a Roman bride, nervously adjusting her flammeum, and a contemporary one walking down the aisle today. The most pervasive and intimate of these legacies is, without a doubt, the wedding ring. The Roman custom of presenting a ring during the betrothal, often made of iron to symbolize enduring strength, and placing it specifically on the third finger of the left hand, has endured in a nearly unbroken line to the present. Their belief in the vena amoris, the vein of love that ran directly from that finger to the heart, might be anatomically fanciful, but it was a powerful symbolic notion that captured the imagination of subsequent cultures. While our rings are typically gold or platinum now, the circular shape itself, with no beginning and no end, still echoes the Roman ideal of an eternal, unbreakable bond. That small, personal symbol of a pledge, worn on the same finger, is a silent, daily reminder that we are still participating in a tradition that a Roman citizen would recognize instantly. Then there is the dramatic moment the groom lifts his new bride and carries her across the threshold of their home. For us, it's often seen as a charming, romantic gesture, but for the Romans, it was a deadly serious act of supernatural defense. They believed the threshold was a liminal space, a dangerous boundary haunted by restless spirits eager to curse a new beginning. A stumble or trip at this precise moment was an omen of catastrophic bad luck for the marriage. By physically carrying his bride, the groom ensured a flawless, auspicious entry, protecting their future from malevolent forces. We've lost the superstitious terror, but we've retained the powerful symbolism of the husband ushering his wife safely into their shared life, a physical act that still marks the definitive moment of crossing from one world into another. The ritual has been sanitized of its fear, but the core meaning, a protective, caring transition into a new chapter, remains powerfully intact. Look next at the bride's veil. Today, it's often a fashion statement, a symbol of purity, or a dramatic reveal, but its ancestor is the Roman flammeum, that large, translucent veil of vibrant saffron yellow. The Roman bride didn't wear white. She was cloaked in the color of flame to publicly pray for fertility and the blessings of the gods. The veil also served a more practical, superstitious purpose. It hid her face from jealous spirits or the envious gaze of others as she traveled through the streets in her vulnerable transitional state. While the color has shifted to white in Western tradition, largely due to Queen Victoria's influence, the act of veiling the bride persists. The modern blusher veil that covers the face before the ceremony is a direct descendant of that ancient protective measure, and the moment the groom lifts, it still echoes the Roman ritual of unveiling the bride once she was safely within the sanctity of her new home, revealing her to her husband and signaling the completion of her journey. Even the centerpiece of the modern wedding reception has its roots in ancient Rome. Our multi-tiered, elaborately iced wedding cake is the distant, decadent cousin of the simple libum ferium, the spelt cake that was central to the most sacred form of marriage, conferitio. During that ceremony, the bride and groom would share this cake made from far a primitive wheat, as a sacred offering to Jupiter. The act of breaking and eating the cake together was a powerful symbol of their union and shared life. While our cakes are no longer religious offerings, the ritual of the couple cutting the first slice together and feeding each other is a direct echo of that ancient practice. The cake itself has evolved from a simple, wholesome loaf into a masterpiece of sugar and design, but its role as a communal focal point of the celebration, a sweet shared by all the guests to partake in the couple's joy, can be traced right back to that sacred spelt cake shared under the watchful eyes of the Roman gods. These connections are more than just historical curiosities. They are a testament to the enduring power of ritual. We may have forgotten the original reasons, the fear of threshold spirits, the belief in a vein of love, the need to ward off envy with a yellow veil, but the actions themselves have been woven into the fabric of our culture. They persist because they satisfy a deep human need to mark life's most important transitions with meaningful symbolic acts. When you slip a ring on your partner's finger, when you are carried into your first home together, or when you cut a slice of wedding cake, you are, whether you know it or not, participating in a living history. You are performing a ritual that connects you to the hopes, fears, and timeless human desires of a Roman couple from 2 millennia past, proving that some traditions are so powerful they can bridge the vast gap between their world and ours. After all this, what are we left with? We've traveled from the intense legal negotiations between fathers to the final, symbolic crossing of a threshold. And the picture that emerges is so much richer and more complex than any simple ceremony. A Roman wedding was never just one thing. It was a meticulously choreographed performance operating on multiple levels at once. A fascinating fusion of binding legal contract, calculated social strategy, deeply held superstitious ritual, and, for the fortunate, a genuine partnership that could blossom over time. The entire process was a public declaration that the personal was inherently political, that the joining of two people was inextricably linked to the strength and future of the family, the community, and ultimately, the Roman state itself. These elaborate rituals were not mere pageantry. They were the essential machinery of Roman civilization. In a world without our modern institutions, the family unit was the bedrock of everything, and matrimonium was the tool that guaranteed its survival. Every element, from the size of the dowry to the specific knot in the bride's belt, served a purpose. It ensured a clear and legitimate lineage for the inheritance of property and civic status. It provided the stability that allowed society to function, creating new households that would produce the next generation of soldiers, taxpayers, and citizens. And for the elite, it was a primary engine of political power, weaving intricate webs of alliance that could make or break senatorial careers and shape the fate of the republic and empire. The wedding was where the grand narrative of Roman power was written in the most intimate of settings. Yet, for all its cold pragmatism, the system was not entirely devoid of warmth. As we saw in the heartfelt letters of Pliny or the moving words on a tombstone, the human spirit has a stubborn habit of flourishing even within the most rigid structures. Love and deep companionship could, and often did, grow from a union that began as a transaction. This beautiful tension is what makes the subject so compelling. It forces us to move beyond our modern assumptions and appreciate a society that could view duty and affection not as opposites, but as two strands of the same strong rope, both necessary to bind a life together and tether it to something larger than itself. And in a way, those bonds they forged 2,000 years ago still hold a part of us today. The next time you see a bride in a veil, or a couple exchanging rings, or a groom carrying his new wife over the threshold, you are witnessing a quiet echo of ancient Rome. Our traditions have been sanitized of their fear of malevolent spirits and their focus on legal authority, but the core human desires remain for protection, for commitment, for a symbolic marker of a profound life change. The rituals have evolved, but their DNA can be traced back to the bustling streets of a Roman city, to the flame-colored veil and the clatter of walnuts on cobblestones. This journey through the world of Roman matrimony reveals a society that was at once utterly alien and strangely familiar. Their priorities were different. Their beliefs were rooted in a world of omens and capricious gods, and their social structures could be brutally hierarchical. Yet, in their desire to build a future, to secure their legacy, and to find meaning and connection within the rules of their world, they were not so different from us. Now that we've pulled back the curtain on what these weddings were really like, we'd love to hear what resonated with you. What was the most surprising ritual you discovered? Was it the use of a spear to part the bride's hair, the raucous and bawdy procession, or the immense legal power of the dowry? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going across the centuries.